The second section. Welcome back. If you're all ready, let's get started today. Bezat Hashem, inshallah, we'll finish the second section of Sefer HaKuzari. We'll be dealing with the language, the Hebrew language, as basically it's one of the systems of transmitting the revelation of God. And we'll see how it's somewhat unique to other languages in this respect. It was specifically designed not just to be beautiful, but to be able to transmit deep meaning in a way that written language usually faces these kind of challenges. We'll see exactly what I mean. We're going to go into the different structures of the language, from the vowels, the consonants, the vowels, and to the ta'amim, the accents and the cantillation marks, right? The way we read from the Torah, and see what the purpose. It's not just for melody and music, but they have significance and meaning. And hopefully, if we have time, I'll demonstrate just two pesukim. I'll take two pesukim from Bereshit to see how, when you are precise with the ta'amim, it can completely change the meaning of the verse that you're reading. And why is it so important to be very precise in reading the Torah? Okay, so we started already last week when we were talking about the divine wisdom of God, and how the divine wisdom of God has its own language that was kind of constructed to communicate this wisdom, right? So the king of Kuzar, he says, is Hebrew truly superior to other languages? Do we not plainly see that other tongues are more developed, richer, and refined? Right? You have to think this is like 1,000 years ago. Hebrew, at that time, it's in the middle of a 2,000-year exile, at a time where it's not really a living, practiced language. And so at that time, Hebrew seemed to be a very, we call it like a poor, as in it doesn't have a rich vocabulary, right? So the rabbi, the Hachani, responds and says, Hebrew shared the fate of its people as they declined and were dispersed. The language too diminished, but judged historically and conceptually, its original form was the most elevated. He says it may seem that way today because as the people spread out and they started to assimilate into their local cultures, these picking up Arabic, these picking up, Polish and German and French and whatever, Spanish, whatever language their host countries were, Hebrew as a spoken language was kind of diminishing, and people were forgetting the language. However, if you judge it historically, we can see how it's a language that was always very, very rich. And none of the prophets ever had issues expressing ideas in the Hebrew language, very profound ideas. According to our tradition, it was a language spoken by Adam and Eve themselves. This is evident from the way names are formed. Adam, from Adamah, right, from the soil, from the earth. Hava or Ishav, right, from Ish. Kimeish lukochazot, the woman was made out of the man, so Kimeish lukochazot. Cain from Kaniti. Seth from Shat. Shat means gave me. Cain from the word Kaniti means I acquired. Kaniti Ishet Elohim. Noah from Menuha, Zeinahamenu, Mima'asenu, Misavon Yedenu. So we see that all these names back in antiquity, they actually had meaning, right? So that is evident of how people back in antiquity always used this language. The Torah itself bears witness to this. The transmission of this language traces back through Eber, Noach, and Adam. It is called the Hebrew. Why is it called Ivri? Because Eber preserved it after the confusion of the tongues. Right? So once the Tower of Babel, all the languages diverged and split out from each other, the language that was preserved by Eber was Ivri. It's the language of Eber. That's literally what Hebrew means. Abraham himself came from Ur Kasdim, where Aramaic was spoken. He used Hebrew as a sacred language, while Aramaic served daily communication. Actually, this translation isn't accurate. It's really like a form of Syrian. Only later on it became Aramaic or Assyrian. Through Ishmael, Hebrew's linguistic structure influenced Arabic, which is why Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic share vocabulary, grammar, and this linguistic patterns. Right? So these are all, they're called sister languages. They're very, very similar in structure and in grammar to each other. So Hebrew's superiority came especially clear when we consider the people who used it during the age of prophecy. Right? If prophets are on a higher level than the wise men, than the Chachamim, right? So that means the wisest of men, right? That was a baseline from where you need to elevate further to become a prophet. And this was the language that they were all using. It means it's a language that was built to express very deep and profound ideas. Prophecy, public teaching, sacred song, and poetry. Can one seriously imagine that figures such as Moshe, Yehoshua, David, and Shlomo lacked the words needed to express their thoughts, as we sometimes do today, because the language has partially faded from us? It says this, that today Hebrew seems to be lacking in vocabulary, and the reason why Sefer HaKuzari was written in Arabic, and the reason why Maimonides wrote his more deeper philosophical writings in Arabic was because that was like the academic language of the time, and Hebrew, as a publicly known and spoken language, didn't have the vocabulary needed. Says that is only because we're 1,000 years into an exile and we have forgotten the language. Not that the language doesn't support all these profound ideas, because the language has partially faded from us. Observe how the Torah describes complex and unfamiliar objects, right? The Mishkan, the ephod, the breastplate, always selecting words that are exact, precise, and fitting, right? The Torah didn't need to describe objects. It had a word for the objects. The same mastery is evident in personal names, in the classification of birds and stones, right? We see in Iyov and in Psalms and Tehillim, right? There's no lack of words for all the different species of animals. We aren't always familiar with the meaning of those words, but after investigation, we can figure it out and rebuild, reconstruct the language. In Psalms of David and in Iyov's speeches and debates, Iyov, by the way, is basically, it's kind of like Sefer HaKuzari, but with 4 participants, each one with his own philosophy, right? It's a recording. It's not even a recording. It's like a poetic recording of a philosophical debate between 4 different worldviews. That's what the book of Iyov is. And it's one of the most difficult books, not just because of its poetry, but because the words there the Hebrew, the language there is so deep and profound that it really requires modern linguist investigation into the book. So Yob's speeches and debates, and in the prophetic language of Yeshaya. Yeshaya is also a difficult book because the poetry and the Hebrew itself is a very high level of Hebrew. The language never falters. It always finds the right expression. It's just us who need to relearn the language in order, and as we relearn the language, language, the words of the language, their concepts, their modes of thought, they have a logic to them. As we relearn these concepts, investigate the language, we can restore our ancient wisdom. So the language doesn't falter. There's always a word to express whatever concept, even in Eov, where it's four different worldviews debating each other, and still can be recorded in a poetic form over, I think, like 40 chapters. It's like a 40-chapter book of poetry of different worldviews debating each other. So the language doesn't falter, it always finds the right expression. Okay, so Kuzari says, I'm convinced that your language is beautiful and ancient, or that the perceived lacking of vocabulary in the language today isn't real, right? And that it used to be a much richer language than it is today, or at least was then. Says, even so, this only places Hebrew on the same level as other languages, where then is it truly superiority. Other languages clearly excel in poetry, right? Arabic also has great poetry. Carefully measured verses designed to fit melodies and rhymes. It's called the Mishkal Ha'aravi, the Arabic measures of how to divide through melody, divide the verses. So in response, that comparison misses the point. A melody is independent of meter. Meter as in the Mishkal, where you pause according to the melody, right? And the tune does not require a fixed number of syllables. The phrases Hodul Adonai Kitov can be sung to the same melody as, right, Le'oseni Flaot Gidorot Levado, because in Hebrew the tune follows the meaning, not the other way around. So what happens in like a poetic language such as Arabic, or Arabic claims to be, what happens is that many times there's like a hierarchy between precision of the meaning of the word and how you pronounce the word, and how it fits into the rhyme and into the melody. So sometimes you need to twist or mispronounce the word in order for it to fit into the melody that is being sung. So what gives way to what? What's the hierarchy? Is the melody and the meter more important than the meaning, or is the precision of the meaning more important than the melody? So this is true whenever speech is governed by grammar and sense. Rhymed poetry, by contrast, where rhythm and meter dominate, is set aside in favor for something higher and more useful. Clarity of meaning and precision of expression, right? That's the hierarchy of the Hebrew language. The Arabic language is similar to Hebrew. However, their hierarchy is backwards. They prefer the rhythm and the rhyming and the meter and the melody over the precision of the words. The true purpose of speech is to transmit the speaker's thought directly into the mind and even the inner world of the listener. What is the whole purpose of speech? It's I have an idea and it's in my mind. How do I communicate that idea to you, the listener? If I want to teach you an idea that I have in my mind, right? So that means the ultimate purpose of language is the precision of the speech, being able to articulate an idea as precisely as possible so that you can understand what's in my mind as precisely and loyal as possible to what is actually in my mind, right? That's the ultimate purpose of speech. This can only be achieved fully through spoken language, not through writing alone, right? So when we're talking, even on Zoom, right, we're kind of losing a little bit of that, right? So written language is you're just reading the words, right? When you're speaking to someone face to face, there's facial expressions, there's body language, there's now on Zoom, at least, we also have some intonation, emphasis of certain words over others, right? All this is lost in written form. Hence the saying, from the mouth of scholars, not from the pages of books. You say in the Talmud, it says, mipi sofrim velo mipi sefarim. It says, from the mouth of scholars, authors, sofrim, velo mipi sefarim. You learn Torah not from pages on books, but by learning from the teacher. It's the teacher who teaches you Torah, not his book that teaches you Torah. Spoken language is supported by many tools, pausing or continuing at the right moment, raising or lowering the voice, signaling surprise, questioning, command, desire, fear, or submission. Often the speaker also uses the eyes, facial expression, head, and hands to convey meaning. They say, how do you shut up a Moroccan? You tie his hands, because Moroccans can't talk without moving their hands, right? So hands, everything. All this makes up the message of the teacher. Without these, speech would remain incomplete. There's this great scene from a movie. It's an old movie, My Cousin Vinny, right? These two cousins were arrested. They were charged with murdering a clerk in a store, and they just shoplifted. They didn't realize they were being arrested for murder. And in the interrogation, when they finally understood, or one of them understood that he's being interrogated for murder, he says, I killed the clerk, I killed the clerk, I killed the clerk, like that, out of surprise. And then later on, when they were on trial, the police officer read out the moments and the transcript from the interrogation, and he read out, and the defendant cried out 3 times to me repeatedly, I killed the clerk, I killed the clerk, I killed the clerk, right? So without the intonation, without the pauses, without expressions of surprise, right, you lose all meaning, and you can completely misunderstand the intent of the speaker. In the remnants of our sacred language, created and structured by God, there exist built-in mechanisms that replace all these physical aids. There are the accents with which the holy text is read, right? We have te'amim, right? If you go to Shul on Shabbat and you hear them read from the Torah, hopefully you go and there's a good reader who knows how to precisely read the Torah, right? He puts the accent on the right place, right? They indicate where to pause and where to continue. They distinguish a question from an answer, a statement from its continuation, a command from a request, a haste from a deliberation. Entire books could be written on the system alone, right? He actually goes into a lot of detail in these next few paragraphs. I cut it down a lot just so that we can scrape the surface, because really there are entire books by some of our greatest chachamim on the subject, right? Rabbi Saadia Gaon, I just recently bought a three-volume book of Rabbi Saadia Gaon on Hebrew linguistics and the Ta'amim, and he's not the only one. There's Rabbi Yonai ben Janach, Rabbi David Kimchi. They all have books on the Hebrew language. Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi himself was one of the greatest poets of our nation. Not just him, a lot of his friends at that living at the same time. And they also wrote books. For this reason, poetry, bound to fixed meter, cannot fully serve this purpose. Poetry often joins what should be separated and separates what should flow together. Avoiding this distortion requires constant strain and artificial adjustment. For instance, there's this one tune of Lecha Dodi that drives me crazy, right? And they go, Pene Shabbat Nekabla. Says Nekabla is not a Hebrew word. It drives me crazy, right? I don't mind different melodies, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Karlebach, right? Yemenite, whatever. But once you can't properly fit the words, or you need to distort the proper pronunciation of a word to make it fit into the melody, it's just like this too big of a dissonance in my mind that I can't enjoy it. It just drives me crazy. All right, so he's kind of convinced, the Kuzari, right? It is only right that beauty of sound should give way to clarity of meaning. Harmony may delight the ear, but precision gives understanding, right? So poetry sounds nice and it's beautiful, right? However, if it distorts the meaning and the message, then you're going to completely misunderstand what it says. So you need to have the proper hierarchy within the language, or within the structure, the meta language. Yet I see that you Jews nevertheless yearn for poetic meter, imitating other cultures, and attempt to force Hebrew into foreign rhythmic frameworks. And this is true. By the way, a lot of these Kabbalat Shabbat melodies that we use, right? They're borrowed from our neighboring countries or our host countries. That's why sometimes they don't fit. So the Chacham, he says, that is a failing of ours. Instead of recognizing and preserving the language's true superiority, we damage its natural structure, right? So not only did our language diminish, right, because we weren't using it as much, and we're 1,000 years into our exile, but also we damaged the language itself by importing foreign structures into our language and trying to force our beautiful poems and stuff into the rhythm and the rhymes of a foreign language. So we damage its natural structure, a structure built on harmony of meaning, and replace it with artificial discord. By the way, I have to say, a lot of people, they try to bring some teshuvot, some responses of the Rambam, which seem to be attacking poetry and music in general, as if he didn't, he didn't believe in song and poetry. Not that Rambam, he wasn't the greatest poet, but he has a few poems of his own as well. And they try to contrast the Rambam's take on poetry with Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, who's one of the greatest of our poets, right? So I bring this a lot, this perceived contrast between Maimonides, the Rambam, and the Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. But we see that Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi himself, one of the greatest poets, is also criticizing, forcing foreign poetic structures on the Hebrew language. And when Maimonides attacked the poets, right, he didn't attack the Chachamim, the Talmidei Chachamim, who were also poets. But, today, when we look at the ancient poets of Israel, we only remember those of the Chachamim. It's like, who are the rappers that we remember after many, many years? It's the ones that were the best. Not all, right? Not all the rappers that ever existed. So like, a lot of them, you listen to their lyrics, they're complete nonsense. And we had that too with many poets who weren't educated, they weren't philosophers, and they would write poems that sometimes had terrible, terrible meanings, but they were beautiful poems, right? So that's what Maimonides was attacking. He wasn't attacking the poetry of the Chachamim, people like Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, right? People like Ibn Geviro, people like Ibn Ezra, right? Or Rabbi Shemuel HaNagid, who has an entire commentary to the Talmud, and one of the greatest Chachamim of early Spain, and also has entire volumes of poetry, right? He wasn't attacking their poetry. Instead of recognizing, presuming that it's true spirit, we damage its natural structure, a structure built on harmony of meaning, and replace it with artificial discord, right? Preferring the poetic form over the accuracy of meaning. And then the rabbi says, have you not noticed that 100 people can read the Torah as though they were a single voice, pausing together, continuing together, perfectly synchronized? They don't really do this so much today, but there's still some schools where when they teach the children to read with ta'amim, right, they have the whole class reciting a text together, and they're all perfectly synchronized, and that's because of the structure of the language and the ta'amim putting the accent in the right place and having the right melody in the right place. And it's written in our Tanachim what melody and what accent to put where. Says, I observed this, and I've never seen anything like it among the Persians or the Arabs, right? Where an entire classroom or even like 100 people can read the same text with the exact same unified intonation and melody. Such unity is impossible in recitation of poetry. Now you give 100 people the same poem to read by, I don't know, an English poem, and you have them all read it together. You're not going to hear the poem recited properly. You can hear 100 different voices. Everyone's going to stop and pause in a different place or emphasize a different word in the sentence. Now explain to me how the Hebrew language achieves this and how meter interferes with it, the mishkal, the rhythm of other languages, of the Arabic language, for instance, how it could interfere with this process. So this is the basic structure of Hebrew, all right? Hebrew allows, we're not going to get too deep into this. Like I said, there's entire books, multi-volume books written on the subject. Any questions so far? See, Sandra,
Hi, Sammy. Yes, I'm just going to speak on behalf of Rachel. She says her microphone's not working, but she wrote a question for you in the chat.
oh, okay. Let's see, all right, let's see. Mishnaic Hebrew and ancient Hebrew is not the same like the Hebrew today from the Tanakh. It's Hebrew, like any language, has an evolution process. So even some words that we use today, um, sometimes they exist in Mishnaic Hebrew with a different meaning, right? Language follows two different axes. It's called synchronous and asynchronous. Um, Again, there's a whole that's also a whole lecture in itself. Um, but words, even like in every language, you have this. Words that we use today, even in English, I can't think on the top of my head of a good example. But like 100 years ago or 500 years ago, they would have been used differently. So you have, since this is a very ancient language, Hebrew, all right, you have it not just in Tanakh, but Tanakh itself spans over 1,000 years, right, from its writing until the end of the prophets, right? But it also expresses even earlier ideas from a few thousand years ago. So if you look at the early Hebrew in the Torah, sometimes you'll see in the later prophets, it's there was an evolution to the words then, already then. So let's see, Rachel, Erev Tov, if silence is praised so highly in Chazal, why was speech given such a central power in Torah? And how does Halakha balance these two values? That's actually a very, very good question. Silence is praise. It says because um, regarding God, since God is so beyond human intellect, um, it's it's regarding praising of God. The best is just to be quiet. That's the best praise you can give God because uh, if you try to articulate praise of God, what you're doing is you're diminishing his greatness, right? Because any term that you try to use to describe God is limiting God. So that's why the highest form of praise of God is to be silent. Does that answer your question? Let's see. Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else before we move on? Okay, so I'll try to keep this chat open so I see when someone posts something. So Hebrew allows two consonant vowels to stand together. By the way, in Hebrew, oops, what did I just do? How do I get rid of that? In Hebrew, um, the letters are consonants. There are no vowels in Hebrew. Right? The vowels a, e, I, u, right? Those are the nikud that we have under or around the letters, the patah and the sireh, right? The consonants themselves, the letters themselves are all consonants. Even aleph. Aleph is an a. Aleph with a patah is a, or with a kametz is a. Aleph with a holem is o, right? The letter aleph itself is a. That's the sound. A. So Hebrew allows two consonants without vowels to stand together, but does not allow three vowels in a row, except in rare cases. This gives the language natural pauses, balance, and rhythm, creating fluency and clarity in reading. Because of the structure, Hebrew is easy to memorize and its meaning is easy to grasp. By the way, even when we study like Mishnah, right? Mishnah, which doesn't have cantillation marks, we still have a melody for reading the Mishnah, and this helps us memorize the Mishnah. The moment you impose metric poetry, the structure collapses, right? Because now you need to put the accent in the wrong place. You need a pause in the wrong place. The relationship between consonants is distorted, and proper accentuation becomes impossible, right? The accent, there's two types of accents. There's mil'el and milera, all right? Milera means the accent is at the end of the word. Mil'el means the accent is one before the end of the word. Now, what's interesting about Hebrew, and you'll hear this a lot with people who speak foreign languages, for instance, French and English. French, when you hear Americans speaking Hebrew with an American accent, right, everything becomes mila'el. Mila'el, the accent before. Lama ata rotze lalechet, right? It's not ata, it's ata. It's not rotze, it's rotze, right? The accent should be at the end because English is the mila'el language. So when English speakers speak Hebrew, they turn the entire language into a mila'el language, as opposed to the French. French is a milera language. Ani רוצה ללכת, right? melech, not melech, melech, ללכת, not ללכת, right? Where they always put the accent at the end and not before the end. Hebrew has both mila'el and milera. So when I teach my students to read, right, to read from the Torah, I don't care if you're French, I don't care if you're American. If you're going to read the Torah, you're going to pronounce ochel as ochel and ochel as ochel, right? Same word, two different accents, completely changes the meaning, right? What's the difference between ochel and ochel besides the accent? Ochel means food. Ochel means eating. It's two different things. And in Parashat Shemini, you have one aliyah that's dealing with eating of kosher and non-kosher animals, right? And you keep needing to know, right? You need to know, is it ochel or ochel? Because within 2-3 verses, you'll have ochel, and then you'll have ochel. So you can't just automatically assume they're all mila'el or assume they're all milera. You have to read the right one based on the context. Or if you're reading from a tikkun or from a Tanakh that has the nikud and the marks, right, it'll tell you which one you need to emphasize. Is it ochel or ochel, right? So what happens many times when you try to force a poetic rhythm on a text that doesn't fit it, you'll turn a mila'el into a milera, and you could completely distort the meaning of the verse. As a result, crucial distinction disappears, right? Ochela or ochela, right? Omro and omro and amiru, right? They're spelled the same letters, right? Even tenses collapse. Shavti and vishavti, right? Vishavti vishavti means and I returned. Vishavti means I will return in the future. So mila'el and milera could change a noun to a verb, right? It could change the tense from past to future. And these are all very, very important when you're reading the Torah. The Torah is the word of God. You need to be precise. What did God say? Vishavti or vishavti? Is it future or did it already happen? right? Meaning is lost because the accent can no longer function. This is one partial solution, the piyut, right? The liturgical poetry that uses rhyme, but does not violate the internal grammar of Hebrew, right? You should always choose a proper tune in the piyut that matches the words, that doesn't make you distort the words. But once we try to imitate foreign poetic forms, we damage the language itself. And this we repeated the mistake of our ancestors, of whom it is said, they mingled among the nations and they learned their ways. Right? They didn't just learn their corrupted behavior, but they corrupted the language by importing foreign linguistic structures into Hebrew, even when it didn't fit. Okay. So I would like to ask something else as the king of Kuzar. Do you know why the Jews sway back and forth when they read the Bible? See, when people read and study and pray, they're going back and forth. It's very interesting that, this is written like 900 years ago, that already then this is occupying Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi. Right, so the rabbi says, so the Chacham says, some say the custom of swaying while reading is meant to stimulate bodily warmth, right? It's to get you into it, right? Get you passionate about the reading. My own view is that it connects to the matter we have been discussing. In earlier times, it often happened that many people read simultaneously from a single book, right? You may have 10 people, but books are very, very expensive. So you have 10 people standing around a single book, sometimes 10 or more from one volume. This explains why our books were made so large. Each reader had to bend down and turn to read his portion and then straighten up again. So you'd have like different people, right? One would bend down to read, the next would bend down to read, the next would bend down. And basically what happens is people are reading like that, while the book itself lay on the ground. This naturally produced a repetition, a repeated motion of bending and rising. By the way, for instance, Yemenites also, they'd sit around and read from the same book. And so some of the old Yemenites, if you give them a book, they were used to always reading from this angle. They'd have to turn the book like 120 degrees because that was the angle that they were accustomed to reading Hebrew from, right? So, or they'd hold it upside down because they're used to standing on the other side of the book when reading. That was one reason. Over time, this motion became habitual throughout constant observation and imitation, which is human nature. Other nations, however, read individually from their own books, either holding them close to their eyes or bending towards them without inconveniencing anyone else. There was therefore no need for such movement among them. So that's an interesting approach. Of course, this is just speculation of Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi, because people would stand around the book and read together, and every once in a while, someone would have to bend forward to see. So it became kind of like natural and intuitive to read bending down or back and forth. So now we turn to the importance of accents, the orthographic function of the 7 principal vowel signs, and the grammatical precision that results from them, especially from distinctions such as kames, patach, sere, and segol, right? So in English, you have A, E, I, O, U, right? In Hebrew, the A, for instance, has 2 different signs. It has a kametz, and sorry, that's the patach, and the kametz, right? Why does it have 2 different ones? Right? Each vowel has 2 different forms. So it's called Tnu'a Gedola, a big vowel or a small vowel. And this kind of dictates whether it's its own syllable or you need a new syllable, closing a syllable or opening a syllable, right? I get into this a lot more when I teach, my students to read from the Torah, how to distinguish between them and the importance of distinguishing between them. But basically, there's all the main vowels here, and they come in two forms, large and small, right? Gedola and Kitana. So all of them, the Patach, Kamet, Segol, Tzere, the Hirik, Holem, Kubutz, and Shuruk, right? If there's the Vav or without. We're not going to get into this now, right? So these distinctions affect meaning and allow us to differentiate between grammatical forms, such as past and future tense, right? Samti and visamti, as we said before, also with vishavti, right? Va'avarecheu, va'avarecheu, also hacham and hacham, right? And the sheva, if you're familiar with the sheva, it looks like two dot, like a semicolon, sort of under the word, right? Sheva can accompany all these under certain conditions. It also has two forms, by the way, the Sheva. It either is a vowel or it isn't, or sorry, it's like a substitute for a vowel, or it's not a vowel at all. There's two forms called Shvanah and Shvanach, right? For instance, my name in Hebrew, everyone in Hebrew, because they're not very precise in pronouncing my name, they call me Shmuel, right? But the sheen at the beginning of my name has a shiva, and it should be Shemuel. That's the proper way to pronounce Shemuel, Shelomo, because the shiva at the beginning of the word is a vowel, acts like a vowel. It's an e. So Shemuel, Shelomo, right? And not Shmuel or Shlomo. So the first structural form, okay. So Sheva can accompany all these under certain conditions, is considered a neutral vowel. Sometimes it acts like a vowel, even though it's not, and sometimes it doesn't even act like a vowel. It's a vowelless consonant, right? Since any addition would require a vowelless consonant to follow. And there's rules when it's Shvanah and when it's Shvanach, right? But we won't get into that. The first structural form is determined by examining each word in isolation. This is there's three different levels of of the language of the word, right? So one is the word by itself, right? Where do you put the vowels and the tam? Without regard to sentence structure, without combinations or rhythm, right? From this form, you derive the 7 primary vowels in their original state, along with the simple sheva. All right? These are the words in isolation. The next level, the second structural form, concerns sentence level euphony. Elements of the first form may be altered to improve flow. That's the word within the sentence, right? So sometimes within the sentence, because it comes in conjunction with another word, sometimes you need to adjust the vowel or the accent. All right. By the way, this whole section was maybe like 5 pages that I tried to cut down to 1, right? The third structural form concerns the accents or the ta'amim, not just the accent, if it's mila'el or milera, like we said before, ochel or ochel, right? But also the ta'am itself, the cantillation marks, which sometimes influence both preceding forms. So this is a list of the different ta'amim, right? I highlighted for you the tam as opposed to the nikud, right? Like on zarka, the first one you see you have a patach, that's the nikud, those are the vowels. But I highlighted for you the sign on the top, which is the cantillation mark. And where it is also determines the accent. So there's 2 different types mainly of cantillation marks. It's called melech and misharet. Melech, the king, and misharet, the servant, right? So all the ones in yellow are melech. Melech, they stand alone, or they come to make a pause in the sentence, as opposed to the misharet, what I highlighted here in light blue, comes to conjoin 2 words together. So for instance, over here, zarka, I'll just do a little demonstration. Zarka, we do zarka, that's the sound, and it stands on its own. And then over here we have holech segulta. Holech conjoins to the next word, to the segulta. And the segulta is a pause. All right? And so we have some pairs that come together, like the azla gerish over here. Azla gerish. They don't always come together. They often come together. Azla comes to conjoin, to join to the next word. Gerish joins to the previous word, and it separates from the next word coming after it. And then you have a few that I also circled in red. These are pauses, right? Like you could think of it like what's it called? Like a pesik, like a comma in the middle of the sentence, right? Pasek, and the yetiv, and of course the last one, sof pasuk. Sof pasuk, it's the end of the verse. All right, so you have melech, which stand alone and pause. You have misharet, the blue ones, which come to conjoin to the next word. And you also have those that stop completely, like the sof pasuk or the pasek and the yetiv. All right. Any questions regarding this? I'm going to give you a little demonstration of how this can completely alter the meaning of a pasuk. If you don't know which words to join together and which ones to separate, you'll read the pasuk completely differently than the oral tradition intended. Right? So the author of the system possessed knowledge largely hidden from us. Right? He goes into like maybe 5 pages here of detailing this hidden from us knowledge, right? I mean, he had a lot of this knowledge that and he's still claiming that there's a lot more that's hidden from us today. Some of it we can recover through investigations, such as distinctions between past and future, infinitive and passive participle. For example, ne'esaf in ami versus ne'esaf, right? Sometimes it comes together with other things. So what is ne'esaf as opposed to ne'esaf in ami, right? So there is a lot of investigative work, and there's been a lot of investigative work going on over the past 100 years to restore the Hebrew language. But there is still a lot of investigative work going on, right, to recover and restore the language. It hasn't been fully restored yet. So the Masoretic text preserves these distinctions with great precision, even where grammar alone would not demand it. Right? If I were to elaborate further, this book would grow excessively long. My aim has been only to give you a glimpse of this profound discipline, right? Just the discipline of how to read, right? It's a discipline of reading the Torah correctly, right? And it's a lot more complex than just reading any other book in any other language. Not one based on chance, but on fixed and carefully ordered rules. So here I want to give you a little demonstration, if you don't mind. Right, so let's see. This is in Bereshit, right? After the sin of Adam and Eve, it says, and their eyes were opened. It says, I'll read it to you with the ta'amim. All right, I'll read it to you without the ta'amim and then with the ta'amim. It says, "V'tipakachna einei shenehem," right, and their eyes opened up. "Vayideu ki erumim hem," and they knew that they were naked. "Vayitperu ale te'ena," and they sewed some leaves, some fig leaves together. "Vayasu lahem chagorot." All right, and they made how do you call it? They made for themselves hagora, belts to cover their nakedness. וישמעו את קול אדוני אלוהים מתהלך בגן לרוח היום. Right, this is how someone not being makpid on the ta'amim would read it. and they heard the sound of God, the Lord, walking in the garden, liruach hayom, right? Could be to the edge of the day, or to the wind of the day, or the breeze, whatever that means. Vayitchabeh ha'adam ve'ishto, right? And the man and his wife, they hid mipnei Adonai Elohim, they hid from God, betoch etz hagan, inside the tree of the garden. Okay, so this would be a standard reading without paying attention to the ta'amim. So now, if we read it with the ta'amim, it says, "Vatipakachna עיני שניהם," pause, "ויהדעו," pause, and they knew, pause, "כי עירומים הם," says that they were naked. ויתפרו עלי תאנה, ויעשו להם חגורות. So already this pasuk is completely different. It's not, and their eyes, both of their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked, which is a standard translation. It says, and their eyes were open, or now they're able to see, vayedeu, and they knew, comma, ki erumim hem. It says, because they are naked. It's completely different. What does that mean? What it says vayedeu? Well, what did they know? What do you think? What did they know? It says with the ta'amim, it means something else. It's not that they knew now that they are naked. They knew something because of their nakedness. What did they know? I want to suggest, and I can prove this, right? Vayedeu is that they knew each other. How do I get to that? Well, if you go to the next chapter starts, "V'ha'adam yada el Hava ishto," and Adam knew his wife Eve. By the way, what's different here from any other time, where it says "Vatahar," and she got pregnant, "Vateledet Kain," and she gave birth to Cain. Right? So he knew his wife. By the way, this is talking about in the past. Every other time, it says vayeda in the future, or now in the present, right? That someone knows his wife. So what does it mean in the past? When did this take place? I think that took place over here, right? Vatipakachna עיני שניהם, and they opened their eyes, right? Both of them. Vayedeu, and they knew each other. They had relations. Why? Ki arumim hem, just for the sake of their nakedness. ויתפרו עלי תאנה ועשו להם חגורות, says, וישמעו, and they heard it, קול אדוני אלוהים, right? This is a misharet. Et kol, this is a misharet. Azla is over here on top, that's a misharet. It means it comes to connect it to the next word. Et kol Adonai Elohim. What did they hear? They heard the voice of God. Mitalech bagan leruhu hayom, right? Going through the, how do you call it? Going through the garden, right? The spirit of the day, maybe leruhu hayom. But it's no longer God. It's not that they heard the sound of, I don't know, footsteps in the garden. They heard, what did they hear? Not Adonai Elohim. They didn't hear God. They heard the sound, the voice of God. Because God doesn't walk around, right? But his voice can go forward. His voice isn't him. This is completely changing the verse from, you call it a physical manifestation of God walking around in the garden, to the voice of God walking, flowing through the garden, being carried by the wind. It's two completely different readings of the pasuk. And you only get this reading when you are precise with the ta'amim. This is a misharet. It's a conjunction. It brings it together. It's not they heard the sound of Adonai Elohim walking around. It's they heard Kol Adonai Elohim, the voice of God going through the garden. So the ta'amim is very, very important. You can't properly read the Torah without knowledge of the ta'amim and without being precise about the ta'amim. You'll have a completely wrong reading of the Torah. Okay, so I hope I managed to convince you of how there's this great wisdom embedded into the Hebrew language, not just in its vocabulary, but in its structure, in its accents, in its vowels, in its cantillation marks, right? When do you put words together, and when do you separate words or sections of the pasuk from each other, like we saw, "Patipakachna ene shenehem," pause, "Vayedeu," pause, "Ki elumim hem." By the way, this is an atnach. It completely separates the first half of the verse from the second half of the verse. All right? So these are two pisukim that if you don't read them precisely, you just read them wrong, completely wrong. All right, so if I were to elaborate further, this book would grow excessively long. My aim has only been to give you a glimpse of this profound discipline, not based on chance, but on fixed and carefully ordered rules, right? So in this section, we discussed, God's revelation through history, God's revelation as demonstrated through the wisdom in intelligent design, and now we're going through that linguistic system that can communicate this wisdom of God from one person, or from God to humanity, and from one human, from one person to another, understanding the language of the prophets and of prophecy as the Torah and the entire Tanakh is written. All right? And so, King of Kuzari, this has been enough to show me the remarkable depth and precision of the Hebrew language. I'm hoping that I was able to express a little bit of that too in this class today, right? I would now like you to describe what in your view constitutes a true servant of God, right? Who is the Hasid? Who is the righteous, pious man according to Judaism, right? And after that, I wish to hear your arguments against the Karaites, right? Basically proving the oral tradition of the Torah, to learn the core principles of faith and religious foundations, and finally to understand which branches of ancient wisdom have been preserved among your people, right? That is what we are going to get into in section 3, 4, and if we get to section 5 as well. So the next section will be who is the pious. The one after that would be the authenticity of the oral tradition. And if we get to the 5th, we'll talk about some of these ancient wisdoms that still were preserved even throughout our exile. Here is the second section concludes, and the next begins. Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, we'll get into the third section of Sefer HaKuzari. And that's it for today. If you have any questions, comments, insights, please share. Okay.
I kind of have like a comment on everything. So just
Yes,
thinking
please.
about how the world is going now, everything is based off of like AI, right? Or we're going into like this period of AI. So from what you've like discussed regarding the Hebrew language, things like AI won't be able to really fully grasp the Torah, like because it has to do not just with what's written, but how it's said, because they won't be able to have that like
Right, so we go
extra.
back to that statement of the Chachamim, mipi sofrim velo mipi sefarim, right? From the mouths of scribes and not from the mouths of their books. That is very true. What's going to happen, it seems, and it's going now with AI, since AI is very good at generating content, what's going to be lacking and in big demand is original human content.
Right. Yeah, so it's just interesting because it's something that can like I guess like humans will always have to study. You can't rely on artificial intelligence to do it for you in this regard.
Artificial intelligence can. But by the way, I brainstorm a lot with
Oh yeah, for
ChatGPT,
sure. Oh, I'm sure we all
right?
do. Most of
It,
us do.
it
Yeah.
helps me organize my thoughts, but what's important are my thoughts, not
Right.
not not what ChatGPT says.
Right. Well, just because you also think about how people try to translate the Torah all the time, and they'll use it sometimes against the Jews, but it's just they don't understand all this content, all the context behind it, and they'll probably use AI nowadays or all these translators to do it. But I don't know. I just find it interesting, like the depth in it and how it's so much
Right.
that it's
So
something that'll never really we'll never be able to
the
replicate.
Torah can't really be properly translated.
Right.
That's the truth, because every word in the Torah can have different meanings to it. And a translation would decide on one meaning, which may not be a correct or precise one. Never mind that if you put a verse into ChatGPT and it doesn't know, or Grok or whichever AI you like, and it doesn't
Yeah.
know to differentiate between a mila'en and milera, or a tam misharet, or where our tradition says you should stop, or you should separate the verse, right? Then it's not going to give you a right analysis of the pasuk of the parasha.
Right. Exactly.
There's other things to take into account too. The Torah itself has two different types of parashiot. It's called an open parasha and a closed parasha, right? There's also things you can learn from the structure of the page itself. You need to actually see the structure of the page.
Oh, just all those different levels.
So it
Yeah.
goes on and on.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very cool.
Maybe we could use AI to help us recover some of this old lost knowledge of ours.
Oh,
No.
cool.
Okay.
Yeah. Just thought I just was going on in my head there.
All right, excellent.
Thanks.